This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto, not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Gareth Soloway, who's no stranger to the show, and we're going to talk about the Fed, the markets, and much more. Gareth, great to have you back on.
Oh, it's so good to be back on, especially in these crazy times.
Yeah, crazy times indeed. Lots of bank collapses and inflation and the Fed, and everybody's anticipating what may happen next week. Maybe tell us what you're seeing from your perspective as a trader. What are you looking at?
So for me, when you see this type of fear in the markets, I usually play the nibble role, which means, I start to look for the assets that have been crushed the most, and I start to nibble a little bit. Now, you have to be really careful with the banks because we don't know if one of these banks, the regionals, for instance, will be halted and then the government takes it over. But the way you mitigate that risk is by looking at some of the ETFs, the KBE or the KRE. And this way, you're not really too worried about one bank. It's all about the sector in general. And so I think nibbling on those is kind of interesting. And again, the key here is understanding that the fear always is our worst enemy, and it causes panic selling. And ultimately, I don't think all the regional banks are going to fail, frankly. So it does offer an interesting opportunity on the long side. By the way, same thing with oil. We've seen a major drop in oil. Some of the oil trades that the talking heads on CNBC were just going nuts over, telling us that these were the plays to be in, they've now collapsed. Some of these stocks down 20-30% off of their recent highs. Those are starting to look interesting as a swing trade bounce as well.
Speaking of CNBC, do you believe in the Jim Cramer inverse ETF?
Oh man, I mean, it's tricky. It's one of those things where it's not a reason why I would trade it, to be honest. I mean, right. For me, I don't even know what to say in that situation because it's just, at some point someone will make an inverse ETF of me for all I know.
It's just, I think Jim Cramer is so wrong so many times. It's now a meme, and it has legs with this ETF.
It
but
does.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be trading off of that, but it's still hilarious. Okay. So you got the Fed and FDIC and so forth. They're bailing out these regional banks, right? And then you had inflation came in as expected, I guess, a bit lower at 6%. And folks are looking ahead, and it seems like the market is trying to price that in, that they think the Fed is going to pivot. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think for sure you're either looking at a 25 basis point hike or zero next week when they do announce their rate decision. It's interesting because Jerome Powell was just testifying last week in front of Congress that he might have to do 50. And then literally a day later or 2 days later, the banks began to collapse. And again, by the way, to me, this just shows you the ineptitude of the Federal Reserve and how are they not tuned into what's going on? I mean, if you're that close to a collapse, how are they not at least seeing the warning signs? And for him to be talking 50 basis points is just mind-boggling to me. So I think ultimately 25 or zero is going to be the outcome next week. And it's all going to be determined by the next few trading days, right? We have now another, 4 trading days before the announcement. If we see the worsening impact of what's going on in Europe with the banks like Credit Suisse or the US banks, then it's zero hike. There's no hike. And if we calm down, he might still kind of eke in a 25 just to save face. Because again, imagine he says 50 and then he does zero. I mean, if 25, okay, but yeah, so.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because of these banking collapses and everything that's happening. And we see Jerome Powell is getting criticism and the Fed is getting blamed for their aggressiveness on interest rate hikes. So are the thesis that, you have been sharing and I've, had agreed with for the most part, are they off the table just because we have black swan events taking place with these banking situations?
Yeah, so first off, it definitely does. The Fed does deserve a lot of the blame for what's going on, right? When you hike rates that quickly, you're going to break something in the system. Now they don't deserve all the blame, right? If you look at like Silicon Valley Bank or Signature Bank or these heads, these CEOs of these banks, they saw what the rates were doing and they were not reacting and managing their risk as well. So again, those guys are getting paid millions of dollars and they dropped the ball too. So it's not fully the Fed's fault, but definitely this was the culprit here of hiking rates. And again, for me, it's one of those scenarios where the Fed is at a point where I don't think they're going to cut rates because they don't want to see inflation soar again,
Right.
but they have to be looking at the bigger picture and that do they want another financial crisis? How much more dead weight is out there in the system that could be triggered into default if they keep pushing the lid on interest rates higher?
So, Gareth, are you bullish yet or are you still bearish?
No, on markets, I'm bearish. Now, it doesn't mean there's not opportunities as a swing trade, right? But I've been consistently bearish. I said that this year will be a down year, and we're starting to see that kind of the black swan events materialize. In addition, this is if you didn't believe in a recession coming at some point this year prior to this, you have to. I mean, think about the disruptions financially in some of the Silicon Valley companies that had money there and all over. That's going to be disruptive. It's going to make people wary. It's going to make people not want to spend money. And so I'm still calling for that second half recession in the U.S. economy, which will take the S&P down. Probably, again, I'm looking at 3,000 points to the 3,000 point level on the S&P.
Oh, sure. Maybe you could share the charts and we could take a
Yep,
look at the S&P and then Bitcoin after.
absolutely. Let's take a look at that now. All right. So this is what you have here, guys. And what we can clearly see is we do have a breakdown. We had this wedge pattern. You could see the down move, the up move, the down move, the up move. And then here we hit it and we broke. So we have broken the trend line that was sloping up. We do have some support right in here, which is why we bounced a couple days ago. Lots of sideways chop. Sideways chop basically creates like a floor in the near term. And that's, again, why we've seen a little bit of a bounce. But once that gives way, you're headed back to your October 2022 lows around 3,500. At some point, that gets taken out. And these are my next two targets. And again, I am looking for those targets to be hit later this year.
Hmm. Now, Bitcoin specifically, it had a big pump, on the news of inflation numbers and so forth. What do you make of Bitcoin and what it did yesterday?
Yeah, so this is so fascinating to me because Bitcoin has had this remarkable, absolutely remarkable rally. And what's amazing to me is that the banking system, the fiat system, the Federal Reserve, they have actually given more credence to what crypto is, specifically Bitcoin, right? Think about that. I mean, here we see banks failing and money maybe not being protected and this and that. And you know what asset is fine? It stands on its own. Bitcoin. And so you can't be blamed for people saying, you know what, I don't trust the banks I'm in right now. I'm going to put my money in crypto until I see clarity here. And I think that's one of the big reasons why Bitcoin has run up here in the near term. I also think you can't kind of disregard the USDC issue where USDC over the weekend lost its peg. And so if you were in a stable coin, and I know people that did this, right? They were in their stable coins, even Tether, and they said, I got to exit Tether and I'm going to put it into Bitcoin because I don't trust these stable coins. And that's a big issue because, again, if the stable coins are going to survive, they have to be 100% trusted by the public out there.
For sure. So, do you expect Bitcoin to keep moving up, given this pump, or it might roll back over?
Yeah, I ultimately think it kind of fades, and I think that Bitcoin unfortunately gets caught up in the asset selling overall. So once the banking system, the U.S. banking system and European systems calm down, and there's backstops there, which we've already seen the U.S. kind of guarantee deposits over 250,000. We don't know. I don't know what's going on with Europe yet, but I assume that the European Central Bank will do something of the same. Once that calms down and people feel more confident in the banking system, money probably gets pulled out of crypto at least until we see regulation unveiled in the crypto markets. And I think that's really what I'm waiting for at this point. Like, I've been in and out of some crypto here and there. I'm swing trading it up and down and left and right, but I'm not really putting a ton of my own money in until I see some regulatory, frameworks.
Sure. What about Ethereum and maybe XRP? Are you seeing similar things that maybe the alts may rally a little bit or not?
Yeah, so this is the troublesome issue with Ethereum is that you have this downsloping trend line, which was resistance, and look at that amazing rally, but we slammed right into it and pulled back. So as long as this line holds and we don't get above it on a closing basis, then I think you have to say that this is a short-term top on Ethereum, and I would be looking for a pullback to this line here. So we're looking at a pullback to maybe 1450 or so, give or take. And then the question is, does that break? If it breaks, then we start attacking this lower level down here. But right now, yeah, I mean, right now, to me, the couple things that people have to note if you're investing in crypto, number one and number two are Ethereum and Bitcoin were the recipients of money flow from the banking system in the US, the fiat system. Number two, the USDC issue pushed money into those. That caused the pop. The third thing is, if you look at the reactions in altcoins like Solana, Avalanche, Matic, none of them got to new highs. Like, take a look at Matic here. Right. So this was your bounce on Matic, which was a nice bounce, but it was due for a bounce. But did it ever retest or make a new high? And the answer is no. Versus Bitcoin actually did make a short-term higher high. And so again, what that tells me is this was specifically a run-up in the most trusted cryptocurrencies out there. And you mentioned XRP, and here's your XRP chart, and you can see that barely got a bounce at all. So it really wasn't a recipient of any money flow at this point. And I think, by the way, with XRP, you have this trend line you're just hovering on, and then this one here. I got to imagine that there's going to be some either major breakdown or major breakout in the next couple weeks. Maybe it coincides with some judge's decision. I don't know. I feel like we've been waiting for years on this freaking judge's decision, though.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people they have their eyes on that and waiting to hear. So Gareth, in the short term, you're still bearish. And you mentioned, there's still some more pain. I mean, you got banking crisis, still have high inflation. If the Fed does pause for whatever reason, next week, but they keep rates, they don't cut them. Is there any point later in the year that you turn bullish, like maybe in Q4 or so?
Yeah, so for me, if we got down to that 3,000-ish area, and which again is still a long way from here, I would feel much better about getting into assets. Because right now you have this scenario where the valuations on specifically stocks, they're still elevated, and that's not even taking into account a potential recession in the US where earnings would actually start to drop. And so that's something I'm really struggling with. Now, if you reprice the S&P to 3,000, now we're in a ballpark at least of a reality that I could get in tune with. Now, with cryptocurrency, to me, there's a couple steps. Number one, I think the crypto itself, specifically Bitcoin, is the future, in my opinion. I think even more so after what we've seen in the last week or so, that makes sense to me. The question is, does a sell-off in equity markets, which we've seen have an impact on crypto, does that cause panic selling in something like a Bitcoin? And I think it does. And I also think, there's a lot of animosity in some of the politicians towards Bitcoin, and especially after the Silvergate, and then we saw some of these other issues here with people losing money. And so we need to get that framework out. If we know the rules of the game in crypto, meaning the regulatory kind of framework, then at least we can make decisions based on truths. Right now, if you're investing in crypto, you don't know what's going to come out the next day in regulation, form. And I think that's a concern. And that's one of the reasons why you have to be very careful with crypto here.
Gold, I saw, was having a breakout. Could you share us the gold chart and what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I continue to be a big bull on gold. And I think for me, it's a scenario where if the market stabilizes and inflation, is still above 3%, gold probably works well. If we see the economy crater and people are fearful, like we've seen with the banking situation, gold does really well. So gold, interestingly enough, has this channel here, and we're just underneath that upper range, which is resistance. So you may pause, you may pull back a little bit here, but this is a bullish channel, right? Anytime you have a big move up and then this kind of sideways chop, that ultimately, I would say probability-wise, 70%, 80% of the time, you eventually get a breakout to the upside. So for me, I am bullish mid to long term on gold. Doesn't mean it's going to go up today or tomorrow, but just over that mid to long term 6-12 month outlook, I still think we're headed back to 2070 on gold, and then even higher by 2024.
I got to get some gold.
Yeah.
I know over the months we've spoken, you were looking at some Chinese stocks as well. Are you still in any of those?
Yeah, so I've been trading them back and forth, absolutely. And something like an Alibaba here to me looks very interesting. We have some Fibonacci retraces going on here. If we flip this in here, we can see drawing this up is you can see we're right around a 618 Fibonacci line right here, down again today with the market. But, again, China, anyone who invests in China, understand that the Chinese government's going to do what's best for them, not necessarily for us as investors. So please be aware of that. Having said that, the valuations in China of these stocks are ridiculously cheap. And that to me gets me potentially interested with small positions. I also think that in terms of what the US is going to go through over the next couple of years with recessions, China may not face those same headwinds to the extent that the US is. And therefore, that may be the better investment strategy to start looking overseas. And by the way, that includes something like the EWZ, which is the Brazilian ETF. Start looking for these other countries where money has flowed out since COVID into the US. It may flow out of the US after COVID now into these countries.
Is there any other investments that you're looking at, or pretty much crypto, stocks, and gold?
Yeah, really crypto, stocks, and gold. I mean, for the most part, and again, with stocks, it's being more defensive right now. Stocks like Amgen, stocks like gold miners, gold itself, maybe a little silver here and there, that type of thing. But being really, really careful, keeping a lot of cash on the sidelines. So if we do get that flush, I would like to mention that I've been nibbling on some banks down here, but I'm choosing best of breed, Goldman Sachs type plays that have fallen quite a bit, and also ETFs to kind of get out of the risk area. So that's been something I've been nibbling on. But I'm not playing like the regionals individually, because as we saw, they can fail and then you're basically out your whole investment. So I think that's important to recognize. And then aside from that, it's just looking for Bitcoin to come down again, looking to play it, looking to accumulate it as it gets lower. Ethereum as well. I'll swing trade the alts like Solana and stuff, but for me, long term, I'm not ready to commit capital to those yet.
For sure. I know you mentioned the bank stocks, the big bank stocks. We actually just got news, I think, that JP Morgan is potentially looking to buy First Republic. So these big banks may start scooping up the smaller regional ones.
Yeah. And you know what? So this is what kills me, right? Is that these type of events, what the Fed did raising rates, it had this impact on the regionals. So what is the ultimate end game? These regionals suffer. They either have to sell themselves to a bigger bank, or investors that had money at those banks or investment in deposit accounts are now pulling them out and going to the big banks. And so really the end game here is that these big banks just get bigger and bigger, and the regionals, the kind of the mom and pops, end up suffering and maybe going away. And again, in the scheme of a financial situation, that's the worst thing to happen, because now you're concentrating capital in even fewer places, and that leaves the door open to even more catastrophe.
All right, final question here for you. Next week, if you could put a bet, what's the Fed doing?
25 basis points next week.
Got it. Gareth, always great info, man. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you so much for having me.